Economists have spent decades chasing a frustrating little mystery. Take two people who earn almost exactly the same amount of money. Same paycheck, same cities, same cost of living, same starting line. Fast forward 20 years and one of them is quietly sitting on real financial security, while the other is still permanently one slow month away from disaster. And when researchers try to explain the gap, most of the obvious suspects fall apart. It's not intelligence. Plenty of brilliant people are broke. It's not raw willpower either, because the people who succeed here rarely describe themselves as disciplined. They describe themselves as bored. The factor that keeps surviving the analysis is something almost nobody consciously manages. It's a person's default time horizon, the distance their brain naturally reaches into the future before it makes a decision. Some people's money brain lives about 72 hours out. Others are unconsciously running the numbers on the next decade. And that single setting, more than income, more than budgeting apps, more than any clever investment, quietly shapes where you end up. So in this video, we're not going to talk about hacks, and I'm not going to promise you a single thing about getting rich, because that would be dishonest. What we're going to do instead is look at the actual evidence for why thinking in longer timeframes is one of the few genuine advantages an ordinary person can build, how your own biology works against you the entire time, and the specific, unglamorous habits that let people quietly stack the odds in their favor, because that's all any of this is, odds. Here's the problem you're up against, and it's baked in at the hardware level. Human beings systematically overvalue rewards that arrive right now and undervalue rewards that arrive later. Behavioral economists have a name for it: hyperbolic discounting. In a lab, you can watch it happen in real time. Offer someone $50 today or $100 in a year, and a huge share of people grab the 50. The 100 is objectively better. It doesn't matter. The brain applies a steep, irrational discount to anything sitting in the future, and the further out the reward, the more aggressively it gets marked down until it feels almost worthless. Now think about what that means for money. Every good financial decision you will ever make is essentially the same trade. Give up something small now to receive something larger later. Skip the impulse purchase, keep the money invested, let the account grow. And your default wiring is calibrated to lose that trade almost every single time. You are not weak for feeling the pull of the immediate. You are running a piece of software that was written for an environment where the future was genuinely uncertain, and eating the calories in front of you was the correct move. You've probably heard about the marshmallow experiment, where kids were told they could eat one marshmallow now or wait and get two. The original studies suggested the kids who waited did better in life years down the line, and it became this tidy little parable about self-control. But it's worth knowing that when researchers reran a much larger version in 2018, most of that magic evaporated once they accounted for the child's family background and circumstances, which is actually the more interesting result. It suggests patience with rewards isn't some fixed personality trait you're born with or without. It's shaped by your environment, your stability, and your habits. And habits can be built. That's the whole reason any of this matters. If long-term thinking were purely genetic, this would be a very short video. Let me reframe what patience actually buys you, because be patient is useless advice on its own. What a long time horizon really does is change the odds of the game you're playing, and you can see this with hard numbers. Take a broad basket of the stock market, something like the 500 largest US companies, and look at how often it makes money depending on how long you hold it. If you buy in the morning and check your balance that same afternoon, you're basically flipping a coin. Historically, it's up on any given day only a little more than half the time. That's terrifying, and it's exactly why day-to-day investing feels like gambling, because at that timescale, it is. Stretch the window to 1 year and the picture shifts. Historically, over any single year, that same market has finished positive roughly 3 times out of 4. Stretch it to 10 years and the odds of coming ahead climb to somewhere around 94–95%. And when you look at every 20-year stretch in modern market history, you struggle to find a single one that lost money in nominal terms. Not because the market is safe, it absolutely is not safe on any given day, but because time is doing something specific to the range of outcomes. It's squeezing out the noise. This is the part people miss. Nothing about the underlying asset changed.
The exact same investment is a coin flip over a day and an overwhelming favorite over 2 decades. The only variable you altered was how long you were willing to leave it alone. Long-term thinking didn't make the investment better, it made the probabilities lean in your direction. You went from gambling to something that looks a lot more like patience being rewarded for showing up. And notice I keep saying historically and roughly. I'm not telling you the future is guaranteed to rhyme with the past. It might not. What I am telling you is that stretching your time horizon is one of the very few levers an ordinary person can pull that reliably moves the probabilities in their favor without requiring you to be smarter, luckier, or richer than anyone else. You just have to be willing to wait, which turns out to be the hardest part. So, if the odds get better the longer you hold, why doesn't everyone just do that and win? Because there is a cost to being a normal, reactive human, and it shows up in the actual returns people earn versus the returns that were sitting right there for the taking. Researchers have measured this gap for years. The Morningstar investment research firm runs a study where they compare the return a fund produced with the return the average investor in that fund actually walked away with. And the investor almost always does worse. Over the last decade or so, the typical gap has run somewhere around 1 to 1.5 percentage points a year. Other studies, like the long-running Dalbar research, have historically put the number even higher. Where does that missing return go? It doesn't vanish into fees, it leaks out through behavior. It's the money lost by buying when everything feels exciting and prices are high, then panic selling when everything feels grim and prices are low. It's the cost of checking your account during a crash and letting your gut make a decision your future self will regret. That 1 to 2% a year doesn't sound like much, but run it across 30 years of compounding and it can quietly carve off a huge chunk of everything you could have had. People don't underperform because they picked bad investments. They underperform because they couldn't leave good investments alone. And this is getting worse, not better. Decades ago, the average person held a stock for years. Now, the average holding period, when you look across the market, is measured in months. We've built an entire ecosystem, apps that buzz, feeds that scroll, prices that update every second, that is engineered to shorten your time horizon and get you to act. Every notification is a small invitation to trade patience for activity, and activity in this game usually costs you. So the long-term thinker's real edge isn't some secret knowledge, it's the ability to do nothing while the entire world is screaming at them to do something. That is a skill. It's just an invisible one, because you can't see the mistakes you didn't make. Let's get concrete, because a mindset you can't act on is just a nice feeling. When you study people who consistently think in long time frames with money, they aren't sitting around meditating on patience. They've built systems that make patience the default and impulsiveness the thing that requires effort. Here's what that actually looks like. The first move is to automate the decision so you only have to make it once. The reason automatic contributions are so quietly powerful isn't the automation itself, it's that they remove the daily negotiation with your own brain. If money moves into an investment account the moment you get paid, before you ever see it or feel it, you never have to win the willpower battle over and over. You won it a single time when you set the thing up. You've taken hyperbolic discounting, that steep future discount your brain applies, and you've simply routed around it. You're not fighting your psychology, you're outsourcing the decision to a system that doesn't have feelings. The second habit is deciding your rules before the emotion arrives. The dangerous moments in any financial life are the emotional ones. The market drops 20% and fear takes the wheel. A windfall lands and euphoria does. Long-term thinkers write the rulebook while they're calm, so that the panicked version of themselves has less room to operate. It sounds almost too simple, but the difference between "I'll figure out what to do when the market crashes" and "I decided years ago that when the market crashes I do nothing and keep contributing" is enormous. The first is a decision made in a storm. The second was made in clear weather and just gets executed. The third is developing an actual tolerance for boredom. This is the one nobody markets to you because there's no product to sell. The uncomfortable reality of good long-term money management is that it is deeply, almost aggressively uninteresting. The right move is usually to keep doing the boring thing you were already doing. No adrenaline, no story to tell at dinner, no dashboard to obsess over. The people who win at this have made peace with the fact that a healthy financial life looks like watching paint dry, and they've stopped seeking excitement from their money.
They get their excitement somewhere else and let their money be dull. Boredom in this context is a feature. The fourth is that they measure progress on the correct timescale. If you check your net worth every day, you will be miserable and you will make bad calls, because at that resolution, it's mostly random noise. Long-term thinkers zoom out. They look at the trend over years, not the wiggle over hours. They understand that the daily number is basically weather and the multi-year number is climate, and only one of those tells you anything real about where you're headed. Here's something that gets left out of most money conversations. The exact same logic that makes long-term thinking powerful with investing applies to almost everything valuable in a human life, and the people who really get it apply it everywhere. Skills compound. The knowledge you build in your 20s makes the knowledge you build in your 30s easier and more valuable, the same way returns build on returns. Reputation compounds. Being the person who reliably does what they say over and over for years creates opportunities that no single impressive moment ever could, because trust is earned in tiny deposits and it accrues. Relationships compound. The friend you've invested in 15 years is a fundamentally different asset than someone you met last month, and all of these share the same cruel, wonderful property as money. In the early days, the progress is nearly invisible. You put in the work and you see almost nothing, which is exactly when most people quit, because the short-term brain looks at the effort, looks at the tiny result, and declares the whole thing a bad trade. But the returns aren't distributed evenly across time. They arrive late and they arrive fast. The long-term thinker isn't someone with more willpower grinding through the boring middle. They're someone who understands the shape of the curve and refuses to judge the trade by its opening chapter. They know the interesting part is on the far side of the boredom, and they're willing to walk through the boring part to get there. Now, I want to be straight with you, because a lot of the internet won't be. Thinking long-term does not guarantee you'll be wealthy. Life delivers genuine shocks that no amount of patience can absorb. Bad luck is real, timing is real, and the world does not owe anyone a payoff for good behavior. Anyone who tells you that a mindset alone will make you rich is selling something, and it's usually a course. What the evidence actually supports is narrower and, I'd argue, more useful. It says that lengthening your time horizon reliably improves your odds. It moves you from the coin flip end of every game toward the favorable end. It reduces the range of ways things can go wrong and widens the range of ways they can go right. It won't remove risk, but it will systematically tilt the probabilities in a direction most people never bother to tilt them. And in a world where you can't control the markets, can't control the economy, and can't control your luck, controlling your time horizon is one of the very few genuine levers you actually hold. That's the whole pitch. Not certainty, better odds compounding quietly in your favor for decades. It doesn't sound as exciting as a promise of riches, but it has the significant advantage of being true. The strangest part of all this is that the long-term thinker and the short-term thinker are usually doing almost the same things day to day. They earn similar money, buy similar coffees, live similar lives. The difference is invisible, and it lives entirely in the time frame behind their decisions. One is asking, what does this do for me this week? And the other is quietly asking, what does this do for me across the next 30 years? Same actions, different questions. And 30 years later, those two questions have built two completely different lives. So the real work here isn't learning some complicated strategy, it's slowly retraining the default setting, the distance your brain reaches before it decides. If this shifted your way of thinking about time and money even slightly, do the long-term thing and hit subscribe, because this channel is built for exactly this kind of slow, compounding understanding, and the value stacks the longer you stick around. That's kind of the whole point. And if there's someone in your life whose money brain lives about 72 hours into the future, send them this video. It might be the highest return thing you do all week. I'll see you in the next one.